Welcome to this episode of Executive Tech Talks, the show where we talk to financial services executives about their technology tribulations and triumphs. Many thanks to ServiceNow, who is our exclusive sponsor for Series 2. Hi, Guus. So today we're gonna talk a little bit about how you apply the best practices of resilience to digital customer experience. How do you make digital customer experience as resilient, as always on as it needs to be in order to maintain the trust of your customers?
Great question. Look, there are two factors there that I think are equally important. The first one is basic blocking and tackling. So building your systems in a resilient manner. Instead of having one axe, make sure you have multiple axes where you have load balancers and the ability to fail over between them. So the pure resiliency conversation that most engineers will be familiar with. Really important topic, and that's a very good chunk of our engineering time is spent in designing that, building it, and also testing that. Performance testing, chaos testing, making sure that the components are as good as we can engineer them. But there is a second part to it, and that is sometimes things will fail. What do we do then? And I think there is a role there for resiliency organizations to think through what if something sort of slips through the crack in that first phase. If we've done everything we can, but some circumstance, maybe a system or a process or a human, there's some mistake, some problem. What do we do then? And so that to me is a really fascinating aspect that we've spent a long time thinking about, and that is where that fault isolation comes in, as well as your operational procedures. So what do I mean by fault isolation? The way to design an architecture, infrastructure, and your applications so that if a failure occurs, you can limit that failure to maybe a function or a group of servers or a data center. And so what it tries to prevent is a smaller issue escalating, snowballing, and impacting functions well beyond the scope of the little thing that had its problem. And so like we discussed the other day, when cloud providers came up with their architecture frameworks, it was front and center, fault isolation. Make sure that you're able to isolate fault. But there's an operational aspect to that that's very important also. Let's see, we see a problem in one of the domains. Then what do we do? And if you design your systems well, the decision to decide what do we do could be really easy. It means stop using the bad domain. Stop using the stream that had its problem and just run on everything else. And that needs to be tested and executed and tested all the time. It's something that should become completely familiar to you, right? So we see a problem in a domain, let's route away from it. That should not be sort of a DR type of exercise that you do once every 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. No, it should be something you're ready to roll at any moment notice and perhaps automate. Right? We see failures here, slowdowns here, some metric that we're not happy about, automate that. And those two plays are so important, and in a traditional organization you often spend by nature a lot of time on the first, right? Build resiliently, and just make sure that it never fails, which is of course a good engineering goal, but then you're going to see a lot of payback if you also have a plan and an architecture in place that helps you when something does fall through the cracks. And so to me there's two prongs to that approach.
Which is really interesting. I like the notion of build resilience into the architecture, but also don't assume it's there. From a process perspective, I like the fact that you highlight that, routing away from problem areas shouldn't be something that you do once every 3 months because it's a test. It should be inherent in the architecture. It should be designed to be self-healing or at least self-maintaining in that respect. But nonetheless, there's an element of human practice and, testing. How do you recommend that organizations practice for failure and practice their failure experience so that it doesn't affect them when it really happens?
A beautiful way, and this becomes really natural with sort of an agile DevOps approach, is if you're going to do software developments to production, why don't you use the same domain structure, right? And so be it a whole data center, be it a chunk of your data center, be it a chunk of an application in your data center, you can combine these things. People will call them rails or work groups or what have you, channels. You deploy to one rails, and if that doesn't work, then you roll back using. But the key here is using the same mechanisms, the same tools, the same people, the same organizational awareness of this rails was just upgraded. Maybe if it's not behaving well, we don't roll out to the others and so forth. And so it's a real simple advice, but you use your deployment strategy in conjunction with that fallback strategy, where you can disable and route away very quickly. That's a beautiful natural way of doing it. And in modern times we do releases so frequently. By definitions, those get tested very, very, very frequently. So those functions are there when you really need them.
I think that's a very interesting approach if you're an application developer, and if your team is fully agile and fully DevOps, it shouldn't be a problem. I'm wondering if the cloud and data center folks find it as natural and as intuitive, because at least in the data center world that I've lived in, there's much more of airlift in kind of mindset where, these things are giant aircraft carriers and you can't turn them quickly, and you certainly wouldn't dream of just changing your mind and rolling everything back. Do you find any cultural challenges there with the data center folks?
I think it's a matter of all getting to the same goal, and it does become a culture that needs to be there throughout your organization, your tech organization. And folks will understand why we're doing that. And I think if you've lived in the customer facing business, and you've maybe lived through an outage or two, and maybe seen that sometimes, yes, you do need to move the ship really, really fast, because otherwise the iceberg will hit you. So I think it is important to build communication channels, to build ways so that everyone, no matter what your role is or what group you're in, is aware of how these principles have helped and maybe have helped prevented issues. And those tend not to be published very well. Like in an organization, generally speaking, people will be aware of big outages, right? I mean, oh my gosh, we had that outage. Well, how about the near misses? And those, we would have had an outage if it wasn't for the ability to do so and so, and getting that communication again will help to teach people, and also get buy-in for a future. Hey, I know this is going to set your project back by about some time, but we really want you to do this, and if you have those communication channels open all the time, those conversations get a whole lot easier if they understand where you're coming from and why you're asking for certain features and abilities.
So essentially, you would say the primary challenge is to get folks who think in a bit more of a traditional waterfall approach, particularly the infrastructure folks, to think in that more agile approach, and also communicate early and often about the consequences of making certain decisions, so that they can kind of quickly see that feedback loop that you talk about so often.
And it will help them in their jobs too. So many years ago, reliability was often a function of the infrastructure folks. And if then something went wrong, the first people we looked at were the infrastructure folks. And which was not fair, which was not where how things should be. And so in that sense, you can help with explaining why we're designing these systems. And so, this is a conversation about all of us, business, application development, infrastructure, and all these teams within those organizations. It's not one team's organization to make this resilient. No, it's a combined group effort, and again, that's part of a resilient culture that I think is hard to beat as far as effectiveness. Because again, if you have those conversations ahead of time and in little groups, and everybody's talking the same language, same concepts, it will make your projects and your rollouts go very, very smooth, and that's hard to beat.
Well, I very much like the way you talk about the notion of a resilient culture, and of course a digital experience or a customer experience centric culture, because It turns out that your priorities fall into place when you keep your customer's experience front and center, always be asking yourself, how can I make the customer's experience even better, while recognizing the fact that there will be failures and there will be issues. And if you sort of keep that as your North Star, while at the same time think about the fact that failure is inevitable, issues are inevitable, how do we engineer around it, and how do we build processes to sustain that customer experience in the event of failures, I think you're pretty far down the path of doing an excellent job. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to this episode of Executive Tech Talks, and a special thanks to ServiceNow, who is our exclusive sponsor for Series 2.